I have a confession to make. I kind of felt when I started out into practice that to talk about money or to be really into financial planning was kind of akin to being like the Wolf of Wall Street, where the only real principles governing my life was how to make the most money. After this week's episode and conversation with Dr. Mark Soth on the Cold Steel podcast, I think of financial planning in a completely different way. In fact, I would argue that Dr. Soth provided on this episode some of the best advice I've ever heard about how to live in a truly fulfilling way. Dr. Soth is an intensivist at the McMaster University. He's done significant work in the space of physician financial independence. He has a website called The Looney Doctor, as well as a limited run podcast called the Money Scope Podcast. In this episode, I basically asked Mark everything that I could think of with regards to financial planning, ranging from the utility of having a corporation in 2026 in Canada to tools that Dr. Soth uses for financial planning. Most importantly, Mark and I explored how financial planning can help us best live the good life. Check out all the resources and links from Mark in the show notes, and we hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the Cold Steel Surgical Podcast with your hosts Amir Farouk and Chad Ball.
Dr. Soth, thank you so much for joining us on the Cold Steel Podcast. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to have you on the show. I have so many questions and so many things I want to ask you, and I think our listeners are going to really enjoy our conversation. Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and where you did your training?
Sure. I grew up in a small town in Northern Ontario called Kapuskasing. So if you look at a map and look at a bunch of nothingness, it's kind of sitting right there in the middle. That's where I grew up. And then I went to school in Peterborough for my undergrad university. I was going to be a high school teacher. That was kind of my backup plan, and got into medicine at McMaster, where I did my residency in internal medicine, respirology and critical care, and then stayed on as faculty after that.
Sounds like maybe you were a bit influenced. And I see that from some of the work that you've done by the sort of evidence-based culture that exists in McMaster. Like even the way that I think you talk about and write about investing is evidence-based. Like you're often citing from papers and studies that you found.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to make good decisions with our money, then we need to do that with the best information available. And that's especially important with money because there's all sorts of people out there trying to sell us stuff. And that's sold based on stories. And people can tell great stories that are not backed up by any evidence. So it's a good way for us to be able to ground ourselves and push back against
Yeah, it's
that.
funny, like sometimes I feel like we step out of the clinical realm and you're at the behest of whoever tells you whatever, right? You're like, oh, well, my car needs to be, it has XYZ piece. And you say, oh yeah, okay, I guess. But we have all the skills to do that type of deep dive into virtually every topic. Now, whether you have the time to do that or not.
Yeah, well, I think we're actually especially vulnerable to it in medicine for a couple of reasons. I mean, one is that, we're used to working more and knowing more, leading to better outcomes. And with investing in the money world, as long as you understand the evidence usually shows that actually doing less and interfering less is better, which is the opposite of what works for us in our careers. And we're also wired to basically start from a position of trust. When I ask someone to see one of my patients, my baseline is that their main motivator is to do the best thing possible for them. Whereas with the financial industry, there are lots of people out there looking to help us, but some of them are influenced more by other motives as well. And even those that are out there to try to help us, a lot of them get their training from their employers who happen to sell products or use a certain strategy to make their money. So even though if they have the best of intentions, they may not always have the same database that they're working from that someone like us who is looking at it from scratch objectively.
Yeah, I think it's really an astute point that you've said, that we start from a place of trust, and that's not always the world around us. I'm curious what your clinical and academic practice look like at McMaster now, and I'm actually curious if the work that you've done around physician finance is part of your academic profile. I'm obviously a bit biased in that the podcast has been part of my academic aspirations, and so I'm always curious about how people have worked in their not let's say, non-traditional interests into their main job?
Yeah, well, my main job has changed probably every 5 to 10 years, which is one of the great things about medicine is you can shift around what you do based on your interests and where you see the greatest needs and opportunities. So when I started off doing all of internal medicine, respirology, and critical care because I really couldn't. There was not full-time work in any one of those things, so I found full-time work by doing a bunch of those things. And as that was kind of my clinical practice. And then my teaching practice was started out being very clinical and then organizing for resident rotators on those rotations. And then as time came by, I got more opportunities to do other things. So I shifted more into critical care because there was we needed some reorganization of it, which required a lot of effort. So I spent time doing that and eventually took on more of an administrative role, running that, what became a department for us. And I ran that as the chief along with the rest of our team. And then from a curriculum standpoint, I helped develop a couple of courses in our field because we had just started having critical care exams. So we made a review course for that. We established that for around 10 years. Then I moved on. And that's how I ended up doing the personal finance pieces. Somewhere around there, I'd been chief long enough that it was time to pass it on. The course was running really well, time to pass it on. And I was thinking, well, where can I change my direction? That's a big vacuum. And the obvious vacuum to me was people's ability to manage their finances and their time and use that. And the reality is the reason why I've been able to change the way my career goes to follow my interests is because I've had a good financial position along the way. So that's enabled me to shift what I do based on interest and not worry so much about the financial aspect of it. And at this point, really, I'm working very part-time clinical and spending most of my time actually doing this educational work. I think this is kind of where there's a major need, and it's been developing and coming along quite well over the last, I'd say, 5 to 6 years. There's been a much more realization about how important this is compared to when I started out doing it. So I think it's gaining traction, and the impact of that is for us as physicians, if we have this position, and you can teach a bunch of physicians to do that, well, have huge system impact because now you have a big group of smart, motivated people who are able to use all the tools at their disposal to shift around and get the best outcomes and fill needs that they otherwise may not be able to do. So
I'm curious how you got into this space. Like, were your parents in finance, or was that just you just had an interest in it? How did you get into this space?
well, I mean, I got the Wealthy Barber from my dad when I was a teenager, and my parents basically lived very frugally and retired early in their early 50s. I had an aunt and uncle who retired in their 40s. So that kind of managing your money and balancing your time and money was part of my upbringing. It's a bit different in medicine because in medicine, I think most of us, even if we didn't have to work, most of us do enjoy our jobs and find meaning in it in some way. So if we can, sometimes when it's challenging, if we could shape how we work, that changes it completely. So that's kind of where I ended up coming into this, is that I was looking at, well, what has allowed me to do this? Well, it's been my financial literacy and being aware of how my money works has allowed me to do all sorts of things. And I saw a lot of colleagues around me struggling with that, especially the ones who were the most burnt out. I mean, the reason why you get burnt out, one of them, I mean, there's all sorts of reasons, but one of the troubles is when you feel helpless and that you can't actually change things. And having a strong financial position, which doesn't just happen automatically, which I think is one of the assumptions we make as physicians, but it's not necessarily correct. Having a good position allows you actually to make those changes. So you can look at what's going on and move in a new direction. So I was flirting with all of those things together and thought, okay, well, I'm going to start learning about it and writing about it. And the more I learned and started writing about it, the more I realized actually no one was doing this in the Canadian context, which we have some things that are different, and no one was doing it from a physician standpoint, which we see things a bit differently from a lot of what's out there. So I thought that I had something different to say about it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You listen to some of the, now I don't know if White Coast Investor precedes you or not. But that I think that one was a big, or well-known resource, but it's very different. I mean, you listen to that.
Yeah, they were already well established when I started out.
I
But
listened to one episode where they talked to urologists that made more than $1 million in a year, and they were talking about how they had different clinics set up with all their advanced care providers, and I was like, well, this has no relevance to me whatsoever. So, I'm so glad that you
well,
started.
actually, I actually think it does, in the sense that, a lot of us, if we just put our heads down and do the usual route of practicing medicine, we miss some of those opportunities. If you understand how to run your business and the value of your time, you may actually extend the reach of what you do by using some of that financial acumen to build a better system that you work in. I mean, that's kind of what I did when I started looking at critical care at our hospital. I looked at where the inefficiencies were, what were the pain points, and then we made a more efficient system, which not only made our quality of life and patient care better, but it did actually increase our incomes too. So understanding that medicine as a business allows you to actually improve your care delivery, because you can run things more efficient, use those
Yeah, can you
resources.
talk about what you did to reorganize things, if that's something you're allowed to talk about?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, and it wasn't just me. When I say me, it was actually a big team of us. So we had our ICU was always overwhelmed by a lot of occupancy. There were other critical care units within our hospital that were functioning as silos, and it was very difficult for us to move patients around and get the right patients in the right place at the right time. It actually took a lot of legwork from us. We would literally have to walk to other units, see patients, call their MRPs, arrange for them to transfer out if we wanted to move like one patient. So what what should have taken you 30 seconds took you an hour of your time. And then those units had their own issues too, where the nurses didn't always feel as fully supported and as well equipped to deal with everything that was going on. So we had, what I did is I met with all the stakeholders from all those different units. We kind of hashed out what are the biggest issues that we're facing. And what we found out, because there was a lot of conflict at the time, was actually we all shared a lot of the same issues, just from a slightly different angle. And so we started working together how we could build that. So we ended up addressing a lot of the issues to make it a seamless, coordinated system. And we also measured data while we were doing that. We were able to use that data to improve how things were funded and to demonstrate benefit, which got, support from the hospital in the region. I mean, that when I started, one of the classic thing is you say, well, we need more resources, and then you'll get back from your hospital administration, well, okay, well, give us a business plan, and that's usually where the discussion ends, because the physician goes, well, I can't do that. But if you can pull together a team and figure out what the issues are, what does it take to address that, and what are the costs and efficiencies that you can achieve, then you can put together that business plan, and you got data. You have data to back that up. Then the conversation, when you go back to them, is very different, because now they've said to go have a business plan. You've come to them with all that, and it's an entirely different conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think why I picked on that story is just to highlight the idea that I think, and we'll get to this in a second, but I think that by trying to get more ownership of our financial lives and developing that part of our brains, or that way of looking at the world, we can make a difference in so many dimensions of our lives. It's not just like a selfish, oh, can I make more money? Or can I retire early? I think, as you say, you could make a difference in the world.
Absolutely. And we have a big opportunity with our practice. We also, can have roles in our community and our family, all of those things. But the limiter that we have with that is time. And money is basically an exchange that we use for time. So if you learn how to manage your time and your money, well, they're tied together. If you manage your money, then you have more control over your time, and you can focus it on improving how your impact is.
Sounds like when you were the department head, you noticed a lot, like you sort of alluded to this, that you noticed some of your colleagues that were really burnt out, or perhaps weren't taking care of that side of their lives. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the common pitfalls, challenges that you see physicians falling into, and particularly with your background as being, the head of critical care at McMaster?
Sure. I mean, the first thing I would say is that I'm not talking about this stuff because I'm some sort of expert and who has never been felt burnout, right? I mean, I think I definitely have flirted with it at different points in my career, particularly towards the end of COVID, and also a little bit leading into it. That's part of why I was shifting my practice. So I think what everybody who deals with it or encounters it, it's different. So the definition of burnout is by definition supposed to be an occupational disorder, but the reality is none of us work in isolation. And for us as physicians, our career is a central part of our lives, but we're impacted by what's going on with our family, in the community, and what the government's saying about us, the other colleagues we may be working with. All of that influences us and is part of interfaces with our career. So you start getting problems in different aspects of that area, it could influence your career. And even within your career, for us to have a satisfying career, we need to have some kind of sense of purpose. We need to have connections and relationships with other people, and it needs to be mentally stimulating. And then we need to feel like we can move things around to deal with that. And that's where the financial piece of it comes into the equation. So the right answer for everybody is going to be different, and the way burnout manifests can be different for everybody. I think the key is if you look at if you want to look at it simplistically, to say, okay, well, where is my career and life right now? And what does my ideal career and life look like? And, for most of that's a Venn diagram with some overlap in the middle. And the question is, okay, what do you need to do to make that overlap more? What are some of the concrete actions you can take? And then how can you do that? And the answer maybe just is usually a different way of spending your time and money to prioritize making some of those changes.
I know you and I are both part of these. There's one Facebook group called Physician Financial Independence, which I actually have found incredibly helpful and useful. I think the questions that people post in there are very helpful, and I learn a lot from them. I have to say, the one thing that I've always struggled with a bit is this sort of overall sense and general kind of unhappiness that physicians seem to have, like, oh man, like our lives are so tough. We have all this documentation. We have all this, like, we don't get paid as much as we feel like is commensurate to the work that we do and the amount of time and effort and, all the hours that we spend that are unpaid, all this kind of stuff. Do you think things have changed in the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years that maybe actually doesn't make physicians' jobs as, if you were to purely think of it from a very utilitarian perspective, has something changed? Have things changed that have made going to medicine a less attractive career? Like, when I think about my own children and what I'm going to tell them if they say, oh, I'm interested in going to medicine, I do wonder, maybe it's not the most sensible career. I'm curious from your perspective, having been in this space, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, well, I think a few things that I've noticed. I mean, one is you're going to hear people who are unhappy are generally much louder than the people that are happy doing their career, right? They tend to just be doing their thing. People who are unhappy, you're going to hear about it usually. And what I would say from my perspective is, I've been in the space of medicine for probably 30 years. It's a pendulum, and it does swing back and forth. Like when I started practicing medicine, we had just gone through a period of time where, medical school positions have been cut because the thinking was, well, doctors cost money. The best way to solve that is to have fewer doctors. So people were run off their feet, and the public was mad at us because they weren't getting what they wanted. And the government was saying, well, doctors are just, greedy and not fulfilling the need. So it was a time of unhappiness within medicine then. And then what happened, that was the time where they're talking about the brain drain. Everyone was leaving, going to the US from training, a very high proportion anyways. And then what happens is eventually, well, there's a point where it has to be addressed, and then things get better. And things did get better a lot over the course of probably a 5-10 year period. And then, for the last 10 years or so, we've been swinging back the other direction again. So, yeah. I think that if you're unhappy in your career in medicine, by the way, my daughter is interested in medicine. I think she would be a great career for her for all the reasons that I've already talked about it. You can choose to do different things over the course of your life with it. But I think you have to I think it's always going to be challenging environment. The challenges change as time goes by. Like we've had fee cuts, we've had tax increases, we've had government saying bad things about us. There's been a lot of inflation that's made it very difficult for people who are starting out to kind of get ahead. And, when you're in medicine, you feel that even more acutely because you've put, 10, 15 years of training in before you start to make a larger amount of income. So you really feel behind the eight ball. And then when you are making a larger income, and you're paying higher taxes and being told you need to pay more, it's hard. It feels very discouraging. So I totally get that. And I would not discount that at all. What I would say is don't lose hope because these problems have physicians play a critical role in society. We're not easy to replace. Even with AI, we're still humans, and the human touch is part of healthcare. So have hope that the pendulum will swing back again. And what can you do in the meantime? Well, I think the meantime, really focus on what makes you happy and satisfied with your career, and take control of the things that you can control, and don't focus all of your energy on the stuff that you can't control. Like a lot of stuff you hear people complain about are things that they actually really can't influence. But you can influence how you spend your money, and you can spend in the ways that are important to you. And if you understand that, you may not be spending on money on things that are less important to you. So you may have more for stuff that's important to you. And in your work, focus on your own progress and how you can improve that. And whether it's doing things that you enjoy or if it's improving the efficiency of how your practice works. There's things that you can control, and I would focus kind of on that aspect of it. It kind of changes the framework a
You
bit.
talk actually a lot about this in your first episode of the Money Scope podcast, where you talk about designing a good life. I love that idea. I love the idea of what it means to design a good life. So I'm curious if you could just talk to us a little bit about when you're thinking about what a good life looks like. What is a good life, and how do you go about designing a good life for yourself?
Yeah, so again, it's going to look different for everybody. The idea of designing a good life is that, at the end of your life, you feel that things have gone well and you've accomplished things that you thought were important to you. And that's basically based largely driven by your values. So you have to understand what's important to you and what's less important to you, so you can focus on the things that are important. And then also in different facets of your life, which compete against each other, how do you prioritize those as well? So I know that sounds pretty nebulous, but the way you can kind of get at it is ask yourself the question of, if I'm on my deathbed, what do I want people saying about me? And that gives you a sense of some of the things you feel are important. And who do you want to be there saying them about you? And that gives you a sense of some of that balance between the different parts of your life as well. So that's a good way to kind of start thinking about what it is that's important to you. And then living the good life is, how can you live your life spending your time and money working towards those values? And it's really powerful because it allows you to focus on that, and also allows you to, when you face distractions away from that, to say no to things. Because every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So if you can have a decision framework in your mind about what's important to you, then you can make those decisions easier for yourself.
A related concept you talked about in that first episode is this idea of hedonic adaptation, or the hedonic treadmill. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how does that maybe interfere with designing a good life?
Yeah, well, humans are wired to survive in the moment, and that's done great things for us over evolution. So it's also hard to overcome. And we tend to value things in the present more than the future. And in terms of happiness, there's different kinds of happiness. There's hedonic happiness, which is kind of like positive, good, happy feelings in the moment. And there's more eudaimonic happiness, which is kind of a longer, more satisfaction type of feeling that tends to be longer lasting. So we tend to adapt to the short-term stimulus that gives us hedonic pleasure. So adaptation is great for us in many ways, but this is one way where it can harm us. And the classic cycle is that we see something that we want, and we think if we have that, it's going to make us happy. And that can be like a thing like the next iPhone, or it could be a vacation, it could be a promotion, or some other recognition. It could be anything, really. We get it. When then we actually adapt to that, and first, when we get it, it's exciting and we're all happy with it. But then we adapt to that, it's less exciting. And then we see the next thing that, well, if I just have that, then I will be happy. And then we gradually ratchet up the speed that we're running on this treadmill as we adapt until we are running flat out. And that can be especially difficult in medicine, because not only do we have, on the one side, we have this natural tendency to spend and spend more money or time to chasing the next happy thing, but we also have kind of a lot more freedom than the average person to ratchet up our work to fund that, essentially. Whether it's spending or going for some promotion or something, we can work more towards that. And working itself may be intrinsically rewarding in medicine. There's relationships that are there. It's stimulating. We get paid to do it. So you can get this double-ended cycle where you're spending more, you're working more, which I call the earning spending trap. And before you know, you're running flat out on this treadmill. And if something unexpected happens, you do a lip skip, whether that's an interruption in your income from a pandemic or a health issue, or a family member has a health issue. All sorts of stuff can happen to us, just like it can happen to anybody else. So, or on the other side of things, if you have a big unexpected expense and you just can't work more to pay for it. So you're trapped at running at this speed. So the thing is to be aware of it, both from the spending and the work side, to try to make rational decisions, and every once in a while reflect on what's going on and how fast you're running, and does that feel good to you or not?
I think that's such a valuable thing to think about, and it creeps up on you so easily, because as you say, there, you feel good about taking care of patients, so even that in and of itself, is such a huge motivator. Even if there was no money attached to it, I think people would still love doing what they do. So it's so easy.
Well, there's a lot of cultural pressure for us too. Like, the demand is endless.
There's always someone dying. That's what my
right.
poor wife will sometimes say that. So there's always some patient that's dying. So, like, it just.
No, we also feel like we can do a better job of it than anybody else can, a lot of the times too, right? So
the personal exception is huge, right? Yeah. So a lot of times people have this goal of achieving FIRE, or financial independence. Can you talk a little bit about that particular goal? What is FIRE exactly? And how, if, let's say, that was a goal of yours, how would you actually go about figuring out what it means to achieve financial independence?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to that. One is the financial independence piece, which I think is an important tool for us, and it's a good, important concept. And then there's the RE, which is the retire early. That's popularized, but I think for most of us, it's more of how can we refocus our time and effort on something else. But having financial independence is what allows you to do that. So financial independence is that you have enough passive income that you don't have to work for, that it funds your living expenses. So then, because your living expenses are funded without working, you can decide exactly how much and what type of work you want to do. So I think that's a powerful tool for us in medicine, because not only can we achieve it, we can actually use it to change how we practice. So it's not an all or nothing thing. It's basically just another angle on that you have to save and invest for the future and control your spending. So there's two sides of the equation. If you keep your spending controlled, that makes it easier to have enough investments to pay for it. And if you spend less than what you make and invest that wisely, then you can grow that in a way to fund your income over time. So those are the two biggest parts of that equation.
There's a 4% rule that you talk about in one of your episodes for financial independence. What is that 4% rule?
Yeah, so the 4% rule, I think, has some uses and some problems with it. The idea is, and this is based on Bill Bengen's research, where he used US data and then applied that historical data to see whether someone would be able to have a traditional retirement from the age of 65 to 95 and not run out of money. And basically, how much of your portfolio can you draw down each year without running out? And he arrived at the conclusion that it was 4% based on a 50% stock bond portfolio and US data. So the utility of that, I think, is it gives us a number that's a rough number to shoot for. So if you take 4%, you could say, well, if let's say I spend $40,000 a year, I need $1 million to fund that. You can flip that around and say, okay, well, I can take my spending of $40,000 and multiply that by 25, and that gives me a number of a portfolio size to shoot for. So I think it's useful for giving people some general sense of how much money you want to aim for. I think there's where I don't think it's very useful is to do like an actual plan, like I've got that and I'm going to pull the trigger and retire now, because there's all sorts of other variables that impact the outcome of that study. So it didn't include fees. So if you're paying advisor fees or fees on the funds that they use, you end up paying both. That's subtracted from that 4% to give you the amount of money that you have. Taxes in Canada can play a big role too. Again, that was pre-tax looking at it. And the other thing is that even the way they looked at it is that that's the probability of it being very, very low that you would run out of money, but the chances are that you would still die with a ton of money. So chances of running out are low, but odds are you're going to have way more. You could have spent more. And that's a cost of that too. If you didn't spend more money, that's a cost as well. So I think you need to, if you are getting closer to where you're actually making that type of decision, actually get a financial plan done, which looks at those variables and then adjust it over time. It's not like you do it once and then you're done. You adjust your course over time. The 4% rule is meant to be you take 4% that first year of retirement, and then you increase it each year by inflation so that you basically have a constant spending power and you never make adjustments, whether the markets are going up or the markets are going down. You do the same thing. Whereas the reality, most of us would think about spending a bit more when our portfolio is getting really big and pulling our horns in a little bit to ride out a market downturn on the other side.
There's no way that obviously we can really delve into all the possible things and questions that we could ask. And you have so many resources on your website and obviously in the podcast as well. There's a few highlights and common questions, at least that I had and some of my friends had, that if it's okay with you, I'd like to just chat a little bit about. I think one of them is physician incorporation. So that's almost common knowledge or passe that, when you graduate and you start your practice, that you incorporate. I'm really curious if in Canada in 2026, if physician incorporation still seems to be the best way to go in terms of minimizing taxes, or if you think it. I'm sure you'll say it depends, but
yeah, I was just getting myself lined up
perfect.
To say it depends.
So what do you think? Do you think it's in general it's worthwhile, or what are the important caveats to think about in terms of incorporation?
Yeah, well, I think it's important for you to understand when it's useful and when it's not, because we often rely on accountants to help us with this decision. And this is an example of how things were definitely easier when I went to practice. Incorporation then had a lot more benefits than it does now. And those have been really kind of ratcheted back with various legislative changes against corporations. So I don't think it's a slam dunk anymore. There are some accountants who may think it's a slam dunk based on old information. Where does it make sense? Well, the first thing to get out of the way is what a corporation does. A corporation does not save you taxes. A corporation gets taxed. What it can help you to do to save taxes is by deferring them over time. So it helps you to regulate your personal cash flow. So if you're not incorporated, whatever you earn in a year minus your business expenses is your income. And if you have years of very high income, you're going to pay a lot of tax because of the highest marginal tax rates, and you don't make that up in low income years by having lower tax rates, just because the way our system is very progressive. So what having a corporation does is that it helps to take money that you don't need to spend right now and smoothly give that to you as personal income over time. So in the short term, that could mean, if you have a parental leave, you smooth the income over that parental leave instead of having years of high income and a year of almost no income. And then over the long run, you take some of the income that you would have paid tax at the highest tax bracket while you're working and draw that out more slowly during retirement to stay in lower tax brackets. So that's how corporation is beneficial. It's by shifting your earnings to smooth them out over time and stay in lower tax brackets. Now, the way that you defer money and invest it to use in retirement in a corporation, that's exposed to tax every year. Corporations pay tax every year on your active income, which is your business income. They pay it at a very low rate, and then you pay the rest when you get pay out dividends later on. And when you add those together, it's a little bit more than if you just taken it as salary. So just flowing money through a corporation actually costs you more tax. So that's one of the reasons to delay incorporating is if you're spending everything that you make, then all you're going to do is pay more accounting fees by having a corporation. And that sounds simple, but it's not, because most of us, when we graduate, we have big debt to pay off, which we have to pay off with after-tax personal money. Most of us are way behind on investing, and we need to catch up on some of our investing. Things like a TFSA require a tax-free savings account requires after-tax money to go in there. And we have a lot of pent-up demand because we delayed a lot of gratification while we were in training. And that includes, maybe trips or other having kids or buying a house, all of these things, which all cost a lot of money, and it's after-tax personal money. So it's not uncommon for people to be spending everything that they make for the first 3 to 5 years of practice. And a corporation's not going to be useful in that situation. Where it is useful is if you've paid your debt down to a level where it's comfortable, it's not keeping you up at night anymore, you've taken care of some of that delayed gratification in terms of personal spending, and you've caught up on your tax-free savings account and your RRSP, because those are actually tax shelters as opposed to a corporation, which is tax exposed. And then you still have more money to invest on top of that. And most of us as physicians will have to save and invest more than what's in our RRSPs and our TFSAs to catch up for the fact that we've missed over a decade of investing and compounding. So we have to be aggressive. And a corporation is a good way to do that compared to just using a personal investment account after you've filled up those tax shelters. So that's one time where a corporation makes good sense. The other time where it could sometimes make sense, or usually makes sense, is if you're able to dividend split with a low-income spouse. So you can if you have a lower income spouse, you can pay them for work that's done for your practice, whether you're incorporated or not. You can pay them a market rate salary. But if they work more than 20 hours per week, then you may be able to pay them with dividends, which don't have to be market rate, which means you could basically split how much you need to live on as dividends and salary to each of you to kind of even yourselves out in a lower tax bracket. Now, that's very rare for physicians to be able to do that, but it would be a benefit. The other time where you may think about it is those of us in an academic practice. If you have to do a lot of research and can get the SHRED credits, corporations can use SHRED credits to reduce taxes, which may be another advantage to consider. But it's not a slam dunk. For people that can't dividend split or don't have SHRED credits and have debt and other personal spending to do, it may make sense to incorporate at some point, just not right away.
My father is a surgeon, and so as a kid, went with him and my mom to the accountant, and I was like, oh, okay, well, as soon as I become a surgeon, then I'll incorporate. But you learn these things quickly, so I think that's very valuable advice that you've just given. I jumped right to when people become attendings, but often I think things an under sort of studied or under thought about period of time, which is actually a big chunk of our lives, is actually during training. I'm curious if you had some top tips for residents or maybe even medical students in terms of how they can best set themselves up to have a prosperous and healthy financial health or setting before they go out into practice. What would those top tips be?
Yeah, I think it differs by stage. I think the biggest trouble I see medical students get themselves into is they get access to a massive line of credit. And what you need to remember is that line of credit isn't money that you've earned. You didn't get that because you're a medical student and now it's money to spend. That's money that you will have to pay back. You have to earn the money, pay taxes, and pay it back at some point. So don't spend it like you've earned all that money. Try to spend it in a way that makes sense. Now, that's the one side of the equation, but that also means don't self-flagellate all the time because you have debt. I mean, if you are you need to eat, and you need to have a place to live, and you need to pay for your tuition and those things to make it through medical school. In the future, when you're working, your future self will thank you that you did that because they're alive and have a great career. So don't beat yourself up about having debt. Just try to be aware that you are going to have to pay it back, and try to live in a reasonable way, not as if you're making a physician income. And the thing that happens in residency is great. You start to make an income, which is nice, because then you can at least try to stop growing that debt. And if you're able to keep living with pretty reasonable expenses, then you may even try to start paying some of it down, or consider whether you might start investing. Either way, the main focus, I think, still is what's the best decision for you from a career standpoint to get the training and career that you want to have. That's what's going to pay off in the long run. Just don't hobble yourself by spending too much money that you don't have yet. Then I think when you're getting into starting your practice, as you're getting towards the end of your residency training, you want to make sure that you learn a little bit about billing. So the schedule of benefits is basically, it's like it's been made to deter us from learning about it. It's brutally huge and confusing, and a lot of stuff actually isn't even in it. It's in these little bulletins that the ministry puts out. So the best way to start learning about it is to see how your attendings bill, talk with, if you have some that are receptive, talk to them about it, about how they do it. And then as you start to move towards practice, consider doing some shadow billing or asking about things you're not sure about. Start building a cheat sheet of the common codes that your profession might use in whatever specialty you're in, and talk to your contemporaries about it, because most of you are struggling with exactly the same thing, and some of you will have good resources. And you usually end up both learning something when you talk about it.
You're talking about deferred and delayed gratification. One of the things you talked about was actually, for example, having children. And some of my colleagues and friends who I polled about questions that they were thinking about, one of them was actually about maternity leave or paternity leave planning, as I guess as an attending, or potentially even as a trainee. I'm curious your thoughts on how to best set yourself up for that. And is there advice that you have about timing? Obviously, this is going to depend a lot on the individual person and when they want to have children, because that's not something necessarily even money can buy. But if you have any general thoughts about how you go about thinking about maternity leave or paternity leave.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough. I can't really tell people what the best thing to do for their situation is. It depends. I think there's no time that's perfect for having kids, and you have to kind of figure out which works best for you. During residency, you get there is parental leave that happens there, that I think is a bit better funded than it is when you're an attending. But of course, you're always going to be juggling a lot. So that's why I say I don't know if there's any perfect time. In terms of planning for, if it's not straightforward, like you're a resident when you're an employee and you get parental leave, if you're an attending, you basically have to decide how you're going to fund that. So there are programs that, depending on what province you're in now, which help to supplement some of your lost income. So you want to make sure you find out about that and how it applies to you and your province. The rules are different in different places. Some of them allow you to earn some income without losing those benefits, more so than others. So you want to figure that out. The other thing you can do is save for it. So if you're not incorporated, then think about how you're going to put some money aside or pay down your line of credit so that you've got room on there to accommodate for your spending needs during a period of time when you're off. If you are incorporated, then you may consider looking at your income and that flows into your corporation and paying it out smoothly over that period of time, rather than having kind of feast and famine. So a corporation is useful for doing that. And it may be one of those reasons to incorporate, is if you anticipate parental leave coming up and you want to, instead of paying taking all your income at the highest tax rate this year and then nothing next year, well, you may incorporate and take some of the income this year, some of the income next year, and smooth it. And as long as you're able to catch up on all those other things relatively quickly, I mean, that may be a worthwhile decision for you. So I think it really depends on your specific circumstances. And I think there's two parts to that. One is the decision to have kids and discussing that with your partner and what the role, what you each are going to do when the kids come along. I think that is really, really important, both in terms of work and home responsibilities, and then how you're going to figure that out, because that to me is probably the biggest decision. People have children with less incomes than what we've got. They tend to have less debt and other demands and more flexibility. And sometimes they have benefits, but I think there's ways we can make it work too, but we really have to spend some time discussing it, plan for it.
One of the things I really love, Mark, about the way that you talk about this is you have this way of making it seem very simple and straightforward and kind of almost common sense, right? Like a lot of the things that you're talking about, if you gave yourself a little bit of time to think about these things, like sit down with your partner and figure out what their responsibilities are going to be. Don't take all your income at once. Like a lot of these things are very common sense. Um, you know, a lot of us will actually go and think about getting a financial advisor or going to people who will actually give us advice about how we can best invest. Again, very big, broad topic, and I'm sure we could spend hours talking about, who provides good advice and all that kind of thing. I am curious about your thoughts around financial advisors, and if you have any thoughts about who, where, and who'd be good places to go to. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'll first off tell you that I've used all the different kind of models that are out there. For whether the mutual funds, there's the mutual fund salesperson model where they don't charge you for advice directly, but it's buried in the fees of funds that they use. There's advisors who will charge a percentage of your portfolio size each year. Plus, you're also paying for whatever funds they happen to use. So you pay for both. And then there's fee-only advisors or advice-only advisors who will give you an advice. They'll look at your situation, give you advice and planning advice, and then you have to pull the levers to execute that, which usually means getting your insurance and investing. So what works for any individual, I think, depends on what their deficits are or what they just would rather someone else do, and they're willing to pay for it. And then also what the advisor can provide for that. So how they can complement those areas of shortcoming, and then also how much it costs for that to happen. So it's a value versus cost decision. The first part is understanding how much they cost, which is their fees plus whatever funds they use. The second part is understanding the value, which depends on your situation. Now, what often happens is the value proposition, and what we think is important is the investing piece. But if you can accept that markets are very efficient, and because even if there's skilled managers out there, which there are, if everybody is competing and everybody's a skilled manager, then the outcome is going to be basically random chance. And there's lots of evidence to show that advisors and their funds struggle to even match the market, about 90% trail. So if the value proposition is that they're going to invest better than a passive index tracking fund that has very low costs, well, that's probably not how it's going to pan out. If it's that they're going to give you access to special investments like private equity or insurance and things like that, again, the evidence that that's beneficial is not really there. In fact, there's evidence to show that it's probably not that beneficial. Where the benefit is behavioral. So if you're going to just sit on a bunch of money and not invest it because you're scared and not learn about how to do it, then paying someone to do that is much less expensive than missing all that time in the markets. So that's a big area of value, is to make it simple and feel safe for you to get invested. So that would be an area of value. Another area of value is if you can't resist trying to stock pick or market time or follow the news and try to react and make decisions based on that. Well, there's evidence to show that has a cost too. It's called the behavioral gap. And you can cost yourself on average 1 or 2% a year up to infinity if you sell at the bottom of a market downturn by making those types of behavioral mistakes. And having an advisor who sits between you and the sell button, provided that they're objective as well, could potentially provide value in that way as well. So, and then assessing your risk tolerance. So what are your goals, and how much investment risk do you need to take to reach those goals? How comfortable are you doing that? And what sort of variability and outcomes are you willing to accept? That's something you could either figure out on your own with some research and spending some time on it, or an advisor could help you with that. So again, it depends on whether that's 90% of investing, which is the important stuff. And it depends on whether you're able to do that on your own or whether you need help to do that. So that I think is an individual decision. Whether you decide to use an advisor or do that on your own, the first step is you need to actually learn a bit about it, because if you're going to do it on your own, obviously you need to understand what's important, what's not important. If you're going to try to hire an advisor, well, you have to recognize good from bad advice and understand which one you're getting. So I think you need to spend the time on that either way.
So if you were to go back in time, having done all this work, done all this research, done all this writing, and made all these resources, what tips would you have for someone who's trying to get a bit of better handle on their finances and perhaps learn a little bit about investing? What are some of your top resources? Obviously, we'll put the links again to the Looney Doctor and your Money Scope podcast. But if there's some other things, whether those are websites or books or other resources that you found helpful, what would those things be?
Yeah, well, I'm actually currently working on a book, so specifically aimed at people starting out their practices. So that's kind of in the works. It's a lot of work. But there are some good books that are out there from the investing piece. My favorite book is Reboot Your Portfolio by Dan Bortolotti. He goes through a lot of the evidence, takes the evidence-based approach and boils it down into the simple, important steps to take to invest. And then also, what are the things that make it difficult, how to recognize that and avoid it. So I thought that was a very good book to use from the investing stand piece. It's difficult to find good planning books out there about all the different things you should do to pay attention. The White Coat Investor, which you mentioned earlier, has a book, I think it's called Financial Boot Camp, which goes through the steps of making a financial plan for yourself, which I think is also a good book for sort of an overview. It's not Canadian, it's in the US context, so it's a bit different, but the basic concepts are still there. And that's part of why we ended up that's why I started the Looney Doctor and why Ben Felix and I did the Money Scope podcast, is because it's hard to find good quality Canadian resources that hit up all of these things, especially from a higher income perspective and the different issues that we face.
Well, I can't wait to read your book. I'm looking forward to it, and you'll have to let us know when it comes out so we can promote it to our audience. In closing, we always ask our guests to tell us a little bit about, if they had to go back in time and give advice to themselves as a chief resident or as an early attending, whether it's financial or not, what would your advice be?
Oh, if I were to boil it down to one sentence, it would be to listen to what my wife tells me. That I can tell you, looking at you, we're a great couple in that we complement each other, and we have different views on things. And so the big financial mistakes that I've made is because I didn't listen to her.
Well, I guess that the subtext or the hidden message there is find a good partner. I think that.
Yeah, well, I think that is very important, actually. And if that would be one of those tips early in life, is that, it's not just about dating someone that you're attracted to. You need someone that you're compatible with to be a life partner. And that doesn't mean having someone who's identical to you. It means having someone that you can communicate well with, shares important core values that you can't compromise on, and helps to balance out your other deficits, kind of like a financial advisor does, but maybe like a partner advisor for your life. So I think that is absolutely critical. And of course, it is challenging, and if it doesn't turn out well, then it's one of those expensive things that emotionally and financially expensive. But yeah, it's definitely worth the effort of putting into spending the time on that decision.
Well, the one thing I actually forgot to ask you before we wrap up is, from a behavioral perspective or from a day-to-day perspective, I'm really curious what tools you use to kind of keep track of your own expenses, as well as your investing. Are there I hate to say it, are there apps or other tools that you use in 2026 that you find really, really helpful to keep your life in order?
Yeah, I mean, I still use an Excel spreadsheet for budgeting, and for me, budgeting isn't so much about pinching the pennies. It's planning for cash flow. So I've got the spreadsheet where I see how things work over time, and I can see where my big expenses are coming. I can see where my income fluctuates, and I can plan for that. The other place that I find that that's useful is I can look at our spending from a standpoint. Are we spending each year in ways that are kind of in keeping with what's important to us? So it's not so much about tracking the pennies and all the different categories. It's about, are you spending in a way that makes sense to you? And also understanding your cash flow allows you to spend more confidently. So you can spend on things that are important, knowing that you're not going to run out of money and that you're okay and you've got plans for the things that are going to come up. So that's my budgeting. Software is just an Excel spreadsheet. Same thing with tracking our business expenses. I've tried to use automated things before, but I found I spent more time trying to correct the inaccurate entries than anything else. And the reality is I don't need that fine resolution of where every penny goes. I just need to have a good ballpark idea of where our expenses are. So that's good enough for me. In terms of portfolio, I mean, if I were to start over in the current day and age, I would probably have a much more simple portfolio, and I wouldn't really need to do anything to track it. It would be using all-in-one asset allocation ETFs for everything, which basically solves a lot of issues. I started my investing career before those were a thing, so I have got a bunch of different ETFs, and I use ShareSite. It's a software portfolio tracker, which allows me to track amongst different accounts and accounts for how the tax treatment is. And I can use that for some of my tax planning because it tracks that type of resolution. But most people probably don't need that unless they have a more complicated portfolio. I would say if you are someone who wants to do stock picking and market timing and you think you're going to do better than that, tracking your portfolio is actually critical because you need to compare how you're performing to an objective benchmark that's matched to see whether reality is matching what you think it is. And that's one of the things I like ShareSite for too. It allows me to benchmark my portfolio against others. And I've been tracking it for a long time now, even back in the times where I did bad things.
Show me the data, right? Like that's what we need. We all need.
You've been listening to Cold Steel, the official podcast of the Canadian Journal of Surgery. If you have comments or questions, please email us at podcast.cjs@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.